In chess, there is a beautiful relationship between a superior position and tactics. And 11th world champion Robert James Fischer believed that tactics flow from a superior position. And his strategy is always revolving around the concept of building a superior position, and then tactics will automatically generate from it. And how to build that superior position is the real trick. Bobby Fischer achieved superior position by gaining superior piece activity. In this video, we'll see the game 4 from his famous book, My 60 Memorable Games, and find out how he beats a very strong Argentine grandmaster Pilnik in 1959. So Fischer is only 16 years old, but he understands this concept so well that he's able to beat a very strong grandmaster from Argentina. So let's dive right into the game and see how Fischer exhibits his idea. So Pilnik starts with e4, Fischer replies with a Sicilian defense c5. c5 gives the most fighting chances to black, and Fischer loved it and always preferred it in his games with black pieces. Knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, and a6 is the starting position of the Sicilian Najdorf. The idea is to control b5 because he wants to go e5 and kick that knight away from that d4 square, but he does not want the bishop to land on b5, giving a check that could be very annoying for him. So he plays bishop e2, and Fischer goes e5, knight to b3, bishop e7, castles, castles, bishop e3, bishop to e6, all the standard Najdorf moves, f3, and now queen c7. Fischer's idea is to play the knight to d7, then b6, and engineer that d5 thematic break in the Sicilian. Every time black is able to push that d5 pawn in the Sicilian defense, he is more or less happy with his position because he gets to equalize. And here Pilnik just deviates from the plot a little bit and goes queen to e1. Probably he wants to go queen g3 and play bishop h6, some sort of attack down the g file, but it turns out that it is going to be a little bit too slow. And Fischer carries out with his normal plan knight bd7, rook to d1 contesting the d file, but now b5. Fischer wants to kick those knights out of their natural position so that the knights actually find some awkward spot. So if this knight gets kicked away, it will find some unstable spot at a4, maybe gets pushed back to b1. So Pilnik has to do something about that. But he first, wants to play rook d2 and then queen to d1 so that he permanently stops the d5 break and lands his knight to d5, where it will be very strong. So Fischer actually plays knight b6 and is now reinforcing that d5 break, and Pilnik, instead of going queen d1, chooses a different path, goes queen to f2, and now he's threatening to take that knight on b6 so that black will be able to not be able to get a lot of control of the d5 square, but so if the knight gets traded off. But here Fischer demonstrates his idea of how to gain a better piece activity and then build a superior position by gaining that better piece activity. He does not move the knight, like he can move the knight to c4, hit the rook, hit the bishop, but no, he defends the knight by going rook b8 because he wants to recapture back the bishop so that his rook is a little bit more active, defending the d6 pawn from the b6 square. And at a8 it was not doing anything. From b6 it at least has a job, so it's defending b6. So that's the definition of activity. He's doing something. He's doing some job, some responsibilities, what he's carrying on his shoulders. So bishop takes on b6, rook takes b6, knight d5, but now Fischer is happy to trade off some pieces and then get that bishop pair. He'll be trying to get that f5, e4 kind of moves in order to blow up the position so that his bishop pair becomes more active and more powerful. Pilnik first of all plays f4 so that he wants to open the f file so that Fischer's rook is tied to the defense of the f7 so that it's not able to join the queen side initiative, because the f file will be open up and queen takes f7 will always be a threat to deal with. So Fischer actually improves the position of the bishop now that he hasn't got to worry about the d6 pawn anymore, since there's a white pawn in front of it, so the d file is blocked. So this backward d6 pawn is not a trouble as much as it was when there is no pawn on d5. So now he improves the bishop and is now reinforcing the threat of taking on f4 so that bishop will be eyeing that b2 pawn. So Pilnik counters that by going c3, so kind of blunts out that dark square bishop a little bit. But now Fischer's idea is to bring the rook back, and Pilnik took on e5 and bishop takes on e5, and now bishop sits on a beautiful square eyeing at that h2 square, Fischer's idea would be to drop the queen back to d8 and bring it to g5 to h6 and coordinate that bishop on that h2 square. So rook would actually get a little bit vulnerable on that b6 square because it was under attack from the white's queen. So he just moves it back. It's still doing something. It's still supporting the queenside pawns, but it will be safely doing that from the b8 square. So he is making prophylactic moves as well. So knight to d4, he actually improves his knight, but now g6. And Fischer is now, continuing his minority attack on the queen side. He wants to, use his 2 pawns, fight these 3 pawns so that in an event of a trade-off, one white pawn will be left on the queen side, which will be used as a target by black pieces to create pressure on the queen side and fight against that weakness. And once white's forces will be busy defending that weakness on the queen side, Fischer will switch his forces to the king side and try to fight against the king. So that's the strategy Fischer is following in this game. So b4, trying to trade off some pawns there. Rook c2, hitting the queen. But Fischer moves it to b6, hitting the knight. So knight is under fire right now. Knight c6. Now queens are again in a trade-off. So a moment to ponder, guys, here. Just pause and think whether you want to take that queen or you want white to take your queen. All right, so of course, as we think that rook is under attack here and we want white to take our queen so that we can recapture with the rook, but currently knight is also hitting our rook. But if we take the knight, then pawn is going to take back and that pawn is going to be a pass pawn, super dangerous. Fischer actually finds a beautiful in-between move, h3. And here there's a problem for a3, takes on a3. And here's a problem for white, which is that if you, for example, take the rook, then this pawn, which is here, is going to be suddenly very powerful because Fischer will then trade the queens. And after rook takes, there is a very nasty threat of a2, and it's really hard to defend against that threat of a1 queen, because if you block with the rook, then you actually give up that pawn, and that pawn is going to promote anyways, winning the rook. So Fischer is very intellectually finding these in-between moves, takes on a3. So black is forced to, first of all, take the queen. Of course, not in this position. Like here, white is forced to take the queen first, and rook takes, and then he recaptures back the a3 pawn. And now Fischer brings his last piece that was not doing anything on the f8 square into the queenside initiative, keeping an eye on that pawn. So an idea for Pilnik would be to place the rook behind that pass pawn and try to push it down the board. But he first of all tries to attack Fischer's bishop. I mean, tries to trade it off by Fischer's bishop, at the same time counterattacking Fischer's light square bishop. So Fischer is forced to capture the knight. And like Pilnik thought that, okay, it's okay to give up Fischer a pass pawn because he's now having 2 pass pawns. But the idea that Fischer's pieces are so active, they're finding a lot of activity there, attacking much more, greater number of squares on the queen side, is able to fight these pass pawns that are on the queen side. So Pilnik actually goes for a passive move, knight to c3, trying to defend that pawn laterally. But now it gives Fischer this idea to infiltrate with rook to b2, hitting that bishop on e2. So Pilnik decides to counterattack Fischer's bishop by going rook to c7 and hitting the bishop on d7. So Fischer actually moves it to safety, bishop to f5, g4, hitting the bishop, bishop to e4 check, and also winning the pawn in d5. But Pilnik has a tricky move here. He saves everything by going bishop to f3. The bishop was also under attack, so it made sense to defend the pawn as well as throw the bishop into the way to block check. So now Fischer does not want to trade. He claims that white light square bishop is bad. It's just looking at its own pawns. But Fischer's light square bishop is really active, attacking that rook, is ready to support that pawn, push further up to the e4 square. So he makes it more active. But Pilnik thought that he has a tactic. He moved the pawn forward, and he thought that he would be queening and at the same time hitting black's rook at the a8 square. But it turns out to be a mistake because Fischer actually goes rook to d8, hitting the pawn on d6, and Pilnik's rook on f1 is also under attack. So he cannot go rook to d1 trying to counterattack black's bishop, because rook takes d6, defends the bishop at the same time. So Pilnik decides to play rook to e1, counterattacking black's pawn on e5, but Fischer is happy to take that dangerous d6 pawn and give up the less dangerous e5 pawn. And again, material balance material is balanced, guys, but Fischer's pieces are much more active. The rooks are much more like this rook is entirely cutting the king, is not allowing the king to enter the position, and we'll see how that rook is going to be proving itself as a bone in the throat of white's king, right? Because it's not allowed to get into the game, and hence he has better activity. He increases the activity of the d6 rook by moving it to f6 and hitting that bishop on f3. And Pilnik decides to defend his bishop by going rook back to e3, trying to defend the bishop and also counter-attacking Fischer's bishop. But here's the position where you guys can pause and think about Fischer's move that actually is a decisive move in this position. It's such a beautiful move, proving his ideology of tactics flowing from a superior position. His rook is superior to, like, his rooks are definitely superior to white's rook because it's cutting the king off, attacking a lot more squares, a lot more pieces. Bishop is much more active on the light squares, much more closer to the king. So there have to be tactics favoring the position that is superior, and Fischer's position is much more superior than Pilnik's. So the tactic in this position that Fischer has is rook takes on f3. Boom. What a move, guys. Like, he finds it and he says that you cannot take the bishop because the rook takes is going to be a piece up. Like, simply a rook up is winning. So Pilnik is forced to capture the rook, and now look at that, guys. Bishop to e4. I mean, what can we say about that? He just, pins down that rook and just takes advantage of the fact that his rook is superior to the white rook on c7 because it's cutting the king off. The king is not allowed to get into the position and save the rook. So Pilnik thought that he had, rook takes f7 and he has some checks. But again, a moment for you guys to pause and think about Fischer's final blow. Just like he literally just, blew Pilnik off with that move. What a beautiful move it is to find. And it's not rook to b3. We know that rook is pinned, so we want to win it. But rook to f2, guys. See the tactics favoring Fischer because now he's attacking the rook twice and he's winning the rook, but he cannot go rook b3 because he will allow the king to get into the position and it will be suddenly a draw. So only because the rook was on b2 and it is allowed to go to that f2 square and king is pushed back to h1, king is bad. So if only it was king on g1, then it wouldn't have worked for Fischer. So has Fischer just gotten lucky? No. Is that he hasn't gotten just lucky. He put all his energy, his entire wisdom, his knowledge, his intellect into building up a superior position by gaining better piece activity, and now he deserves these tactics favor him in this position. So he did not just get lucky. Tactics favored the player with better and superior position. And Pilnik actually just gave a check after king g7. He resigned because he cannot do anything. If he keeps on giving check, just king h6. And if you just start running the pawn down the board, you just take on f3. There is a threat of moving the rook and discovered attack on the king. So you have to take, and bishop takes, and bishop is always there to stop that pawn from promotion. King is coming in, munching on these pawns, and it's a simple winning endgame for black. And Pilnik, for that reason, resigned in this position. So what a beautiful game, guys. What a demonstration of the holy concept of tactics flowing from a superior position, and explained and demonstrated and exhibited by none other but 11th world champion Robert James Fischer in his book My 60 Memorable Games, game number 4. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys are having fun watching these videos and this entire series, make sure to give my channel a subscribe and make sure you like the video. It motivates me to keep making content like this with more energy for you guys. So I hope you guys learned from it. Make sure what you think about this video in the comments, and suggestions are always welcome. See you guys in the next video. Have a good day. Bye.